will listen to the Sirens of Audio.
G'day and welcome to the Sirens of Audio, the Doctor Who podcast that is the audio, the whole audio, and nothing but the audio. Yes, we only deal with audio, except for today, because Doctor Who's been on TV, so I want to talk about it. But it does relate to audio. My name is Dwayne. Thanks for joining me again. This episode's featured audio will be Doctor Who The Reaping, the Big Finish monthly audio range, number 86, written by Joe Lidster. Not only will we be discussing that, going a little bit deeper into it, but we are going to be having a chat with Joe Lidster himself. So looking forward to sharing that one with you too. And it's a Cyberman story. Come on, we've got Cyberman in the TV series that's just been happening over the last few weeks. Everyone's focused on Gallifrey, the Doctor, the Timeless Child. Let's get back to Cyberman, eh? Cyberman's what it's all about. First, I want to address some of the issues that fans have been up in arms about or doing somersaults about because they're so ecstatically happy about how the series ended. Is there anyone in the middle? I think there's quite a few in the middle as well. This has got fans reacting right across the fandom spectrum. Yes, Series 12 of Doctor Who is finished. It is done. We're not going to be seeing Doctor Who on TV for a long time, and that is what is fantastic about audio, because it can be with you every day if you so choose. One thing about audio is that I've noticed that a lot of people who aren't invested in audio stories or the expanded media of audio kind of dismiss it as not important. But I don't speak for everyone who listens to audio stories, but I've invested 20 years of my life into these audios. They are still going today. So having invested so much, not only in time, but in imagination, I'm interested in how the mythos translates between the mediums, audio and TV. I mean, I've heard a lot of fans say that it doesn't really matter. If you read the books, well, they're not canon. This isn't canon. That's not canon. I'm interested in the world of Doctor Who and how the expanded media of audio has had an influence on my view of that world. It's okay for a fan who only watches the TV series to say, well, the audios don't matter, the books don't matter, the comic strips don't matter, but the audios are still going. And I've also had fans say things like, well, Doctor Who itself within the TV show has reinvented certain aspects of its lore or its canon from time to time. For instance, the Destruction of Atlantis. There's 3 different versions of the Destruction of Atlantis. Well, what I would say to that is those 3 different destructions of Atlantis may be completely different time periods. It's quite possible that it was destroyed on 3 separate occasions. The underwater menace destruction was after Atlantis sank. The time monster destruction of Atlantis would have been before it sank. The destruction of Atlantis by the Daemons, that could have been at a separate period in time. So all 3 destructions could have happened. And just as the Timeless Child filled in some blanks that we had in Doctor Who lore, or canon, shall we say, particularly I'm thinking of the brain of Morbius, that was a question that fans have been thinking about, or at least fans of the classic series have been thinking about for 40 years. More than 40 years. And it's finally been answered. So there's plenty of questions that come up in Doctor Who history that aren't answered straight away, sometimes are never answered. But in the case of The Timeless Child, I was very satisfied with the answer of the Morbius Doctors. Now, something in Series 12 that I was not as happy with was the setting of Episode 8, The Haunting of the Villa Diodati. Now, the reason I was unhappy about that, and if you're listening to this podcast about audio stories, is perhaps that a very important series of stories began at that same location, the Villa Diodati, with the same mob of people in the same month that TV episode was set. It was a story called The Company of Friends, a standalone Paul McGann group of 4 individual episodes. So The Company of Friends each single episode in that CD set was dealing with a different companion that was not so often used. So the companions were Bernice Summerfield from The New Adventures. She was probably the most well-known of all the companions in there. Another companion called Fitz, another one called Izzy, and those 2 were from the books, and a new one who was very unusual, Mary Shelley, who was to go on to become a companion. So I'm just going to play for you right now the opening of Mary's story, which is the episode on the Paul McGann set, The Company of Friends.
It was 1816, the year without a summer, when we sojourned at the Villa Diodati. There were 5 of us, myself, my husband Percy, my stepsister Claire, Lord Byron, and his physician Polidori. Our intention had been to spend pleasant hours wandering on the shores of Lake Geneva. Instead, we found ourselves confined to the house for days on end, besieged by the incessant rain and suffocated by a dense white fog. It was while we were there, one dreary night in June, that I first met the traveller known as the Doctor, the man to whom I would become a companion in his voyages through time and space.
Okay, so we have a supposed conflict. We know of the weekend that, we don't know. Was it a weekend? I'm not a Shelley historian, so I don't know the exact days of the week that 3-day period where they were stuck inside the villa and started writing those stories happened. But what you will notice from the TV episode, The Haunting of the Villa Diodati, the Doctor was expecting that creativity to be going. She wasn't necessarily expecting the stories to be written that weekend, but she was expecting to take her fam there and see the creativity in action. But keep in mind, in that episode, we saw no one writing stories. We didn't see Mary Shelley writing Frankenstein. We didn't see Polidori writing The Vampire. And whatever else was supposed to be going on that occasion, we didn't see it. Now, the story of Mary's story from The Company of Friends involves the 8th Doctor, and it's basically a paradox story where a future version of the Doctor turns up at the villa. He's in a very bad way physically, and some elements from the Frankenstein story take place where he is reanimated by lightning. I think it's actually Byron who, in that story, reanimates the 8th Doctor. And then there's a bit of time travel paradox stuff that goes on, and ultimately Mary goes off with the Doctor as a companion. Seemingly, on first glance, you would think that those events took place on the exact same night as the events in The Haunting of the Villa Diodati. So, my first theory is this, that both stories took place at the Villa Diodati, but not at the same time. They could have taken place during the same month, which is June 1816, is it? I think it's 1816. But they wouldn't obviously have taken place at the same time. Keep in mind that the TV episode The Haunting of the Villa Diodati, no writing of these stories was taking place. It's where where Frankenstein was supposed to have been written. Didn't happen. Or at least the inspiration for Frankenstein and the writing of it had started, or something like that. Nothing happened. Every protagonist in that story was too busy being involved with the story. They weren't writing. Series 12 of Doctor Who had quite a few references to memory, and memory being there and being taken away. So we notice that the Doctor's memory, most of all, was affected in Series 12. Big wads of it were taken and are seemingly unable to be recovered at this point. We noticed in episode 2 of season 12 that there are a couple of female characters, Ada Lovelace was one of them, where the Doctor decided at the end of the story to wipe their minds of the events of that adventure. So that was a theme, wiping the memory of certain people that they came across in their travels. Now, my theory is this, that the events of the haunting of the Villa Diodati took place in the month of June 1st, because it's well known that the weather during that particular period around the Villa Diodati, when Byron was there and the Shelleys had rented that place nearby, that was not just a few days. That was a long period, an extended period. It was a summer. So there would have been at least a month or 2 or even 3 months of bad weather. So both of these stories could have happened at different times. And what my theory is that at the end of the haunting of the Villa Diodati, the Doctor has taken the fam back to the TARDIS and then has decided, because she can remember that Mary Shelley has been her companion in the past, decides to go back to the villa and wipe all their memories. All the memories are wiped. And so at a later period during that month, the 8th Doctor can turn up and the events in the Company of Friends story, Mary's story, can take place, and then Mary can become the companion to the Doctor. Now, we didn't see the memory wipe. The 13th Doctor looked like at the end of the haunting of the Villa Diodati that she just went off with the fam and there was no memory wipe. Keep in mind, there was also a case where certain memories were implanted into Percy Shelley during that episode. So there was mind-melding memory stuff going on. Memory of future events was put in so that the Cyberium could be released. So that's my theory. The 13th Doctor went back, wiped all their memories. Then the 8th Doctor adventure could take place and Mary Shelley could become the companion. My only issue, my single issue with that, and I've only done a little bit of minor research, right, is that Mary had a baby in the TV episode. In the audio episodes, the baby's not there. And my question is, would Mary Shelley, if she had a baby, go off on an adventure with the Doctor? He was very convincing, but my question is around the baby, and I'm pretty certain that the historical aspects in regards to the baby would probably be accurate in the TV story. So that is probably the hardest thing for me to theorize and understand. But as far as the rest of it goes, easy. 13th Doctor mind wiped or memory wiped everybody, and then the 8th Doctor comes along after at another inclement weather weekend in the month of June 1816, and all those events take place. Then Mary goes on, obviously, and the first adventure with the Doctor is only about 50 years later, and the events of the Silver Turk take place, where they encounter some Mondasian Cybermen who are on a scouting mission, basically, from Mondas to look for Earth. So lots of Frankenstein references in there too. So Mary Shelley's had a lot of experiences that involve Cybermen, Frankenstein-like creatures. Now, it's been a while since I've listened to the last Mary Shelley adventure, Army of Death, so I can't remember precisely how she leaves the 8th Doctor and the circumstances surrounding that, but I'm here to talk about the events that supposedly conflict with the TV episode. And I say that, or I theorize that they don't conflict at all. So I've just done some quick research on that very authoritative website, Wikipedia, And, yeah, Percy and Mary had quite a few kids during the time that they were together. The reasonably brief time that they were together, had 4 children. 3 of them died, only 1 survived. And they did have a child that died of malaria called William. And I think from memory, I think she refers to William in the haunting of the Villa Diodati. So, but I think the baby may have come after 1816. I think she was pregnant, had some premature births before 1816, and a couple more after. And William was one of the children that died. So, that's a lovely thought, isn't it? That baby that we see that the Cybermen spared is going to die anyway, a couple of years later. And I did dig out Army of Death to find out how Mary left the 8th Doctor as companion, if she did at all. And at first I thought, well, maybe she's not going to leave. But then there was a postscript right at the end of the audio, which goes into some of Mary's thoughts and reasoning behind leaving the 8th Doctor.
Before taking pen to paper in this new journal, I thought about my last entry in the other. I hardly recognised the woman who wrote it. A woman so optimistic about what she and Naya might find in Garrick. It feels as though I have been in a world of illusion where danger and death somehow pass as...
Mary, sorry to disturb you, but would you like a cup of tea? I've some marvellous oolong I picked up in Peking in 1893. Or was it 1983?
Yes, please, Doctor. The Doctor. What am I to make of him? I believe he has a hypnotic quality, an undeniable charisma which can blind one to the maelstrom which swirls around him. I was too busy falling for his unquestionably good heart, even believing him to be a soulmate, to notice his other travelling companion, the Reaper, constantly grinning by his side. But my mind is now made up. I shall instruct the Doctor to take me to the place where, for better or worse, I belong. The place where I am merely Mary Shelley.
Well, that theory went for a little bit longer than I anticipated, but I hope you got something interesting out of that, if nothing else. And yeah, definitely check out the Big Finish audio range featuring Julie Cox as Mary Shelley. Not only is she featured in The Company of Friends, but the 3 stories that she travels with the 8th Doctor in are called The Silver Turk, The Witch from the Well, and Army of Death. I can't recommend them enough, they're fantastic. So let's get on to our featured audio review this week. Big Finish monthly range number 86, Doctor Who The Reaping, a 6th Doctor and Perry adventure written by Joseph Lidster. The blurb on the back of the CD reads like this. On the morning of 9th of May 1984, Perry woke up. She was expecting to spend the day relaxing in Lanzarote and that evening leave her mother and stepfather to go travelling with some guys she'd only just met. But things don't always go as expected, as her friends and family discover when 4 months later she returns home, having travelled further than anyone could have imagined. Meanwhile, her friend Catherine Chambers mourns her father, and Perry finds herself meeting some other familiar faces.
1984 Olympic Games will be opening. They're
coming! They're already here!
Coming soon from Big Finish Productions, Doctor Who, The Reaping.
With me here in the studio is Lieutenant Doyle of the Baltimore Police.
Thank you. The vagrant charged with the brutal murder of father of 2 Anthony Chambers has escaped. He's believed to still be in the Fells Point neighborhood and is on the run with an accomplice known only as the Doctor.
I need you to drive me to the police station.
Fells Point.
Face the road!
Drink the coffee, Time Lord.
Doctor, we've got to go back to the TARDIS.
Do we indeed?
Someone's been murdered back home.
Can you hear the leader's voice?
Hi, Nate. Kathy? Mom?
So,
you decided to show your face then?
He says soon we will all be like him.
I saw it. I saw it. Kill the Undertaker. You saw who killed Anthony Chambers.
It's alien, isn't it?
I'll say it was some kind of pod.
From space?
No, Janine, from Arkansas.
We will all be the ultimate. The perfect. The Cybermen.
You will be like us.
The human race, the universe, it isn't meant to be logical.
You are incorrect. I have studied time, and there are patterns.
Patterns?
Patterns throughout time. The order is hidden, but it does exist.
I lived in England for a while. In London, my first husband owned a pub there. The White Rabbit on the embankment.
Yes, I know it. Now, Mrs.
Before he died, of course. And that must have been 7 years ago.
Yes.
Harry.
8687.
Harry.
8687.
8687. Why do people keep saying that to me?
She will be terminated.
If you're watching this, then it means I'm gone. A message from beyond the grave.
To all our listeners, we ask that you be like us. Keep safe and stay inside with your loved ones. I'm Natalie Hamilton, and you're listening to Channel VNTR, the news you can trust.
Hi, I'm Joe Lidster, and I wrote Doctor Who: The Reaping.
Well, thanks very much for having a chat with me, Joe. It's a privilege and an honour. And I want to just read something to you that I noticed on that wealth of information called Wikipedia.
Yeah.
You actually have an entry on Wikipedia.
I do, yes. I'll tell you what I did do is, when I'd done 2 or 3 or 5, maybe 5 Doctor Who audios, it was around that time I discovered Wikipedia, and I think I found someone like Mark Wright or one of the other writers was on there. So I went, oh, I wonder if I'm on there. So I went and looked, and I'd already been deleted as not notable enough. Luckily, I've done more since, so there's somebody else put me back on. But yeah, it was kind of, that was a knock to the ego.
So here's the piece that I want to read out to you. It says, Joe is a lovable character, beloved by many friends who drink with him in the local spoons on Fridays. Now, did you write that?
I did not. That came about because I was in the pub quite a lot. I was in the pub just before Christmas or just after Christmas, and I was with a couple of mates, and my mate Del, he's quite nerdy, and he... we were talking about somebody once at a joke had put my height on Wikipedia, or had put me a little bit shorter than I am, and he went, "Oh yeah, anyone can edit it." So he, because we were drunk in the pub, he put on there. I think it was Del. Put on there, "He's a lovable drunk," or whatever it is that says it. And I said, "Oh, it'll last 5 minutes because someone will delete it." Because Wikipedia, I love Wikipedia, but I love the nerdiness behind it, as in genuinely love it. I love the panic of what tense should this be, and citation needed is my favourite phrase. And I went, it'll be gone in 2 minutes because somebody will go on going citation needed. And here we are 2 months later, and it's still up there. So if there's any Wikipedia editors on there, my page, well, it just shows that nobody really cares about my page on Wikipedia. Could put anything on there.
There's got to be a science fiction story in that.
Oh, I reckon.
There's a title, Citation Needed.
Citation Needed. I'm pretty certain I've got it written down as a potential title, or a rough idea for something. So yeah.
Very good, very good. Okay, so we're focusing on the reaping this time, but just before I came on with you, I spoke about some of the fans who've watched the recent TV series, and I hope you've watched it too and enjoyed it, just like I have.
Yeah.
There was an element in there that was made a little bit fun of by some of the fans who just watched the TV series, because the villa of the haunting of the Villa Diodati was set during a similar period to some Big Finish audios, or at least one in particular. And I put a theory forward that with the mind wiping that the 13th Doctor displays, it's quite possible that she went back and wiped Mary Shelley's mind, and the 8th Doctor could have come along after, and all those events took place anyway.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on on canon and the massive expanded universe in Doctor Who that we've got. Is it possible for anyone to possibly match that up?
I mean, I'd love it all to match up. Certainly especially when I started doing Big Finish stuff. I mean, my first Big Finish was the Rapture, and I was asked to give Ace a brother, and I insisted that she had no memory of the brother because of the New Adventures. Now, obviously, the Big Finish audios have since gone away from the New Adventures, but even then, I remember reading is it Lance Parkin's The History of the Universe or something, a book that tried to put it all together, and in it talked about how, I think in the books, Ace's dad was given two names. There was something like a Harry and a Jack or something, and I found a way to make them match in the Rapture. So originally, I did really try a lot with that. So with the Reaping, I was very specific about when it was set. We knew we couldn't have the stepdad back, so I went and rewatched Planet of Fire and went, well, is this Mrs. Van Geysingham who's mentioned? Her mum's name was mentioned in a book or something like that. So but again, there'd been a slightly conflicting thing about the dad beforehand, so I had to choose one. And I don't think there's any way you can make it all match up, and I don't think it matters. It'd be lovely if it all did match up, but it is a time travel show. There's been the Time War, there's been this, there's been that. I think as long as what you're watching or listening to or reading feels internally consistent, then that's the main thing. And those Mary Shelley audios don't not exist anymore. I think that's always the thing. When people get very angry about this stuff, I do sort of think, well, it's not like someone's wiped the earlier stuff. It's not like you can't listen to those Mary Shelley audios. They're still there. It's just, obviously, if you want to make it all consistent, the Doctor's gone back in time and wiped her memory for some reason or whatever. But, I think you just have to... There's no way after, what is it, nearly 60 years, everything's going to match up. It didn't match up in the early years of the TV series. So let alone is it going to do it 60 years later and everybody's writing stuff. But also I think, like certainly when I was doing short stories for Big Finish, I wrote one about Polly that went full on, wrote her as this absolutely fabulous character. She was a diva and all this sort, and she went back in time, and her life was a mess. And of course, other people have ignored that and written her as a nice older woman who lives with Ben. And that's what people should do, because you should be telling the story you want to tell. So, I always have. I mean, I haven't done anything Doctor Who related in a while, but I always have, when I do it, continuity at the back of my mind. So I think the last thing I wrote was, I wrote 2 Jackie short trips, but they didn't have too much in. They just needed to follow on from stuff. But I wrote an Adric short trip, and I went through and looked at what is set in the E-Space trilogy, because it was set before Warrior's Gate. Warrior's Gate. It must have been set before that. So I went back and looked. I found a couple of websites and looked, and there's a little reference to a novel or a short story or something when Adric remembers his adventures. And I think if you could do stuff like that, it's great. But at the same time, obviously since then they've brought out some more E-Space audios, which obviously my short story 5 years ago doesn't have Adric remembering those adventures. Which is fine, because what do? Do you go, well, wait a minute, that short trip that came out 5 years ago means we shouldn't have these new stories? Nobody, that rules out, we must never have any more Adric E-Space stories. And it's the same with the TV series doing Mary Shelley. That's what, 98% of the audience will never have listened to a Big Finish CD in their life. Do they miss out on a Mary Shelley story, which is a brilliant idea? Let's do Mary Shelley, because she's a fantastic, not just writer, she's a fantastic, interesting person in herself. But, well, we better not do a story, because 10 years ago, Big Finish brought out some CDs that a tiny minority of the audience have listened to.
But that's all right, Joe, because I fixed that. It all fits in perfectly. It's all fine.
Cracks in time. Amy's cracks in time. They sucked everything out, didn't they?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so
absolutely.
There's lots of get out clauses, as long as it's mostly consistent. I mean, what I really like about the final story is, obviously they've added all this new timeless child stuff. What I really like is it doesn't take away anything. It just adds, because the Doctor still, presumably William Hartnell, with no memory of all these other stuff that happened before, still decided, I'm bored of the Time Lords and I want to explore. So it doesn't make him this new character. It just gives him this backstory that came before, that because he can't remember it, it still makes him just this brilliant character of, I'm just bored with these people, I want to go travelling.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and of course, the Mary Shelley story involved the Cybermen, which your story, The Reaping, also deals with too.
Good segue.
So, you mentioned your first story, The Rapture.
Yes.
You're a little bit younger than some of the other big... Well, I think of you as a very distinct Big Finish writer from those early years. So we had big writers like Nick Briggs, we had Mark Platt, Rob Shearman. Those guys were probably a little bit older than you.
Oh, yes.
And so they were huge fans of those classic years, John Pertwee, Tom Baker, and even earlier. But you're a bit earlier than that, a bit younger than that, I should say. So you would have been in your early teens, and the TV series would have finished. So what's your story as far as being a fan goes?
Yes, I mean, you're right. Yeah, I was very much a sort of young writer discovery by Big Finish. All those many years ago, when I did The Rapture, not so young anymore. And I was I loved Doctor Who. My first memory, I have a vague memory of the Malice terrifying me, but my first proper memory is Terror of the Vervoids, which again terrified me, but also had a brilliant moment in it where my mum was ironing before she was going out, and she worked out. It's one of my clear childhood memories. People remember their childhood from like the age of 2. I've no memory of my childhood. But I do remember my mum spotting which of the Megarians, or Moon Men, as I thought they were, which of the Moon Men wasn't really one of them, because she was a big Agatha Christie fan, and she got that one of them didn't press the translator thing. So I loved Doctor Who as a child, and I have a theory that most people really like... Everybody loves Doctor Who as a child, and then people reach about 12, 13, 14, and they kind of grow out of it a little bit. Because suddenly there's boys or girls, and there's drinking, and there's school, there's GCSE, or whatever exams you've got. And you kind of grow out of it, because it should be, it's a kid's show. And once you reach 12, 13, or whatever age, you start to go, well, it's not real. That's just, in my case, that's a man in a rubber mask. In the next generation's case, that's a CGI werewolf. You start to realise it's not real, and that's when I think the new series has been better at sort of keeping people watching it as families watching it. And so at school, there was a bookshop, and I bought a Doctor Who book. I bought the novelisation of The Leisure Hive, and I'd been buying these, or hiring these novelisations from the library of the Peter Davison stories, and I'd never really made the connection in my head that it was all the same series, that these hideous orange hardback books with Peter Davison on were the same thing that I watched with Sylvester McCoy on the telly. And then in the bookshop, they got a copy of Dragonfire. And I was so excited. I was just like, oh my God, I remember this story. And there's the Doctor and Ace on a book. And she put me in touch with this other kid at school who really liked Doctor Who. So I liked Doctor Who as in, I really enjoyed it. He went around with a school bag where he'd got written on it in Tipex, Doctor Who. He got bullied a lot, bless him. And we're still mates to this day. I'm seeing him in a few weeks. And he introduced me properly to the old series. So he said, look, I've got these videos of this thing called The Talons of Weng Chiang and things like that. And I think the only thing I had was this list from the BBC of, if you wrote to the BBC, they'd send you a list of all the Doctor Who stories in order with all the companions written on it. And I was just so excited about who is this Katerina? What are these exotic names? I must discover more about this world. And yeah, so through him, I really got into the old series. And unlike him, actually, what I did do was I got into the New Adventures, the Virgin New Adventures. I was exactly the right demographic for them in that I was teenage. So therefore, looking for things that I thought were really clever and nobody else would really get. And of course, the New Adventures were too broad for the small screen. I'm sure a lot of them are brilliant, but I'm sure a lot of them, actually, if you go back and reread them now, are a little bit, yeah, all right, calm down. You don't have to do everything. But I loved them at the time. So I loved, and that again gave me that interest in sort of a coherent history, because the New Adventures really worked hard and tried to have this future history that all matched up, the Empress and adjudicators and things. So I loved all that. And then went to university, moved to Newcastle, did somewhere else, went somewhere else. And then Big Finish started coming out, and I think I got a couple of the Benny plays. And then I just wasn't near anywhere that sold Big Finish. I think, yeah, I lived in Newcastle, I lived in Dublin, and there wasn't really anywhere that sold Big Finish, but I was aware they were happening, and I still got the magazine, but I didn't have any friends who were into Doctor Who, and of course it wasn't on the telly, so nobody was watching it or talking about it. But I did media at university and decided to, what I wanted to do was get into writing, and I'd had this sort of vague Doctor Who idea for ages. And actually, originally it was for Colin and Nicola. I wanted to write a story for Colin and Nicola, and I was big into clubbing at the time. I'm 42 now, I don't go clubbing anymore. I did actually about 2 weeks ago, and I was exhausted. But at the time I was going clubbing every night. I had this office job, and we just went out every night. And I also suffered from very bad depression, and trance music would do something to me, combined with alcohol and stuff, but combined with my depression. The trance music would really do something to me. So I had this idea of aliens taking over the world with dance music and drugs. And yeah, then it got moved to Ibiza, and yeah, it wasn't very popular. It was pretty much hated when it came out, but it was the first story I ever did, and I wanted to do it. And yeah, it was a real sort of Doctor Who dream for someone who is a fan of Doctor Who, if not quite as fan as a lot of other people. It was something I found out when I got involved with Big Finish, was a lot of people would say to me things like, what do you think of season 18? And I'd be like, I don't know what that is. Is that Leela? I don't know. I know the companions and I know the stories. I mean, I know more now. I am better at it now. I've learned my Doctor Who. But yeah, it was really good. But like you say, I was very much the youngest person to write for Big Finish at that time. And I was very much someone who wasn't. I suspect the majority of the audios or the writers for that first batch or for the first few years knew each other. Personally, I didn't. I came over to London for a Christmas party, Big Finish Christmas party, and that was the first time I met anyone, including Gary Russell, who I do owe my career to. So yeah, it was very exciting. There was two of us. There was another writer called Phil Pascoe who did Ish, who was also, I think, a sort of younger writer with no connection to anybody else. And I think, again, Ish actually, it was more popular than the Rapture. But again, what Ish and the Rapture did, I think because we came from a slightly different background, they were slightly more experimental than a lot of other stuff, than a lot of the other audios. I certainly was coming from more of a fan of the New Adventures, say. So I was doing slightly more heightened emotional stuff, which, it's probably a bit over the top. I haven't heard it in years. It's probably a bit OTT. In fact, I'm sure it is, because, young writer writing my first thing, it's like, put everything in there. Yeah, I was very much from a different background to the others. I've rambled on for about 10 minutes there. I can't remember what you asked.
I absolutely, and neither can I, to be honest. Since you mentioned Ish, I absolutely love that story, mainly because of the actor. I can't remember his name, but whoever it was that played the character of Book.
Oh, that was a great voice.
I can use that audio story for meditation. He just does something to my head. That voice, just brilliant stuff.
New entry, Ish. 3 letters. I-S-H. Ish. Pronunciation variations. Ish. 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 Sometimes hyphenated or preceded by an ellipsis, but in usual circumstances operating as a suffix. It adds meaning, but is not meaningful in itself. Exceptions to follow. Ish. Almost a word. Not quite. A fragment. Something slightly askew.
So, how did you originally pitch to Big Finish? You approached Gary Russell just out of the blue, or what happened?
So where was I? I was living in Newcastle, and I did this media degree, and the media degree, it was great, it was fun, and I learned a lot, but it didn't teach me how to get a job. So I ended up I lived in Newcastle and worked in telesales. And again, was just going clubbing all the time, so I had to leave Newcastle and come back home and save some money. And I think I can't remember how detailed it was, but I sent this idea in of the Doctor and Perry go to this nightclub. Again, very nerdy. The nightclub was the old Unit HQ, because I liked the idea of that building in the Three Doctors becoming this sort of out of a city nightclub that kids would go and travel to. And that thankfully went. And I just sent in this idea, and then I think it was quite a while. I think it must have been like a couple of months or so, with no expectation of anything happening. And then I think, a couple of months later, I got this letter from Gary Russell, which I've still got. I've just recently scanned it in because it's starting to fall apart. It's like something from the Antiques Roadshow. But I kept the letter, and it was, we'd like to work on this further. And at that point, I was just moving to Dublin. So I worked on it while I was in Dublin. And I just sent in this idea. I can't remember how detailed it was. I got a vague memory of doing a document that did say what would happen in each of the 4 episodes. But obviously it was much quieter time for Big Finish at that point. They were bringing out 12 audios a year, and then occasionally a couple of extras. And that was it. And, now they sort of bring out 12 a month. I don't know how anybody keeps up. He just said, I'd like to take this further. I'd like to change it to the 7th Doctor and Ace. I'd like to give Ace a brother. And it was when I came over for the Christmas party, which presumably was, when did it come out? Was it 2002? The Rapture?
Yes.
So it was presumably 2001. Nearly 20 years ago. So old. Oh, so it would have been about 23, 22, 23. When I came over for the Christmas party, Gary said, look, I've had an idea as well. I'd like to move it to Ibiza. So take away the UK setting and move it to Ibiza, which is great because actually I've never been to Ibiza, but it meant I got to do lots of research, and that was brilliant. Just reading books about Ibiza, and sort of in my head, Ibiza was the place you saw on the telly where people just went clubbing, but actually learning about the history of Ibiza, and it's very beautiful. There's a lot of beautiful stuff there, which added to the sort of angels and so on theme. I did have one of the characters was called Angel, and I had to have it pointed out that was a character in Buffy. I can't have a character called Angel, so he became Jude or something. Was just very lucky. Gary liked it, so I just worked on it, got notes, and then came over for the recording. And
what was it like seeing the actors reading your words?
It was actually
putting their spin on it.
Do you know what? In a way, what was interesting was, and this might sound negative, but it absolutely wasn't. One thing the more writing you do, the writing is the longest process of anything, any film, TV show, audio, or whatever. So like with The Rapture, obviously for me it was the most exciting thing in my life. I was writing, not just was I writing, which was my dream, I was writing Doctor Who, which was my favourite thing. And I was writing for Sylvester and Sophie, who were my Doctor and companion. And I'd been doing it for obviously months, if not over a year or so on. And I get to the recording, I meet this guy called Robert Dick, who I'd met before, and he was sort of taking me to the recording and slightly holding my hand because I was quite sort of young and a bit nervy. And the first thing we did was we met Sylvester in the corridor. And Robert went, "Oh, Sylvester, this is Joe. He wrote the story." And Sylvester went, "Oh, I thought it was written by Mike Tucker because it mentioned the quill." And that was such a moment of, oh, because of course for those actors, it's 2 days' work. They've read the script, they've looked at the script, they go in, they record it, and it's done. And that was actually quite good because it meant it slightly made me realise this isn't just everyone's dream come true. This is a job. This is work for people. Sorry, excuse me. And that was great actually. And then they were lovely. He was then very lovely when he did meet me. He did talk to me, and Sophie was great fun, and the cast were lovely. It was, really, really good fun. Terrifying, genuinely terrifying. There is nothing more terrifying than hearing actors say your words. You are just waiting to hear actors. You're waiting to overhear two actors talking to each other, going, "This is rubbish, isn't it?" Which, touch wood, has never happened to me yet. Well, I've certainly never overheard any actors saying that about my work. But yeah, it was just really exciting. But actually, I remember the huge exciting moment was when the trailer came out, and I loved the trailer. I think the trailer for the Rapture is brilliant. So I presume Jim Mortimer put that together because he did the music.
Doctor Who, The Rapture.
Winds of the darkness. Winds of night.
Are you really an angel?
Ibiza is a very mystical land. It is not the first time that angels have visited these islands.
You called me Ace. I don't call myself that anymore. Who are you? What do you want?
I fear the world has gone mad. The children who come here are out of control.
I can see things! Monsters and demons!
Hello! I'm the Sandman.
The Sandman! He's coming for me!
I'm going to eat your soul.
No! No, stop this!
I, Gabriel, Angel of Music, I'm gonna give you eternal salvation.
Spread the truth and love of the Lord and play those kicking tunes.
This club is totally amazing.
Dance, McShane! Dance! Yeah!
That girl with Bryant, it's her.
You've got a picture of me!
The Rapture cannot be interrupted.
I can't stop dancing!
There's something wrong. Something strange. Have you sprayed my drink? This one's gonna completely blow your eyes! Oh, man!
Hey, I thought I was God.
I know who I am.
Dorothy, your whole life's been a lie.
Angels are never what they seem.
How was your Friday night? Mine was completely and utterly mad.
But Gary Russell sent me a disc of episodes 1 and 2. Now, The Rapture is hated by a lot of people, and I can see why. Actually, my big problem with The Rapture is the first script. I'm not going to beat myself up about it. It's 20 years old. God, how was it 20 years old? But is that it completely falls apart in the second half. Episode 4 is rubbish from a writing point of view. It literally tries to repeat the joy of the end of episode 2. No, episode 1. But obviously you can't just repeat something. It made me absolutely realise the main thing I took from The Rapture was you've got to have a good ending. You can't. It's no good because I think episode 1 is a great first episode 1 of Doctor Who. It introduces interesting characters. The Doctor and Ace split up. Ace gets caught up, and then it has everybody in this nightclub falls silent as they get possessed by this trance music, which I think is brilliant. Episode 2 is just crazy. I was again young and experimental and so on, and episode 2 is very experimental in its structure and the way it tells stuff. And again, I think that's really good. Episode 3 is when the Doctor and Ace meet up and go and investigate a boat, because that's what you should do in Doctor Who. Your Doctor and Companion should. So if I was writing it now, I'd be like, no, in episode 3 we're not having the Doctor and Companion going and being in a Doctor Who story. If I'm doing episodes 1 and 2, it carries on for 3 and 4, and so it goes slightly off the rails in 3 and 4. But Gary Russell sent me a disc, presumably unfinished, of episodes 1 and 2, And I mean, I was about an hour late for work because I just kept re-listening to it over and over again. It was the most exciting thing I had ever heard. And there maybe was this little arrogance of, oh my God, this is going to blow people away. There's not been a Doctor Who story like this. Turns out there's reasons there's not been a Doctor Who story like this. But it was the most exciting time, more than the recording, more than anything else, just hearing my words with actors and music and the theme tune and Tony Blackburn. That was the most exciting time. And yeah, I sat outside my office. So I think my walk to work meant I could listen to both episodes on the walk to work, and then I sat outside the office, listened to them both again, and went into the office and said, I'm so sorry the bus never came, because I just couldn't stop listening to it. Very exciting.
And it's interesting that you point out that you were hoping it would be a story that no one had ever heard before in Doctor Who. You went on to write Master the following year, which is often voted on. I see constant Twitter polls and what's the best Seventh Doctor audio. Master comes up regularly. It comes up as a good jumping on point for Big Finish in general, let alone anything else. You got Terra Firma came after that. And then you wrote for Sapphire and Steel as well, which I'll talk about. But I mentioned earlier that there was a bunch of writers in those days that really stood out to me. Mark Platt was one of them. Rob Shearman, Nicholas Briggs, of course. They all wrote different styles. Like Rob Shearman writes these absurd scenarios that can only ever obviously come out of Rob Shearman's brain. Mark Platt, for me, I think the first one I heard of his was an early one called Lugaroo, which was really cool werewolf story.
Yeah.
But he writes stories that are mind-blowingly complex, but you can always tell it's a Mark Platt story. Nick Briggs puts a lot of thought into the detail of his stories, so they're very complex. And then there's yourself, and I would always feel at the end of your stories quite disturbed. And no, not in a bad way, in a good way. It would always make me think, but it would always they would always have these dark tangents towards the end. Particularly, the one that got me the most was Daisy Chain, the Sapphire and Steel one that you did.
Just sick about Daisy Chain is the daughter's called Jen, and the brother's called James, I think. So I think the brother who comes home is James, and the daughter Jen. I can't remember what the dead twin's called. But they're my brother and sister's names. The whole family set up in Daisy Chain. It's not all. I mean, I'm not from a single parent family, but it's very much based on me going home from university for the first time and realizing how things have changed. And my sister at that age, I mean, God, again, this is how old it is. My sister now her daughter's 18. In a couple of weeks, my sister's a manager at Tesco. She's very sorted with her life. She's got a gorgeous house. But my sister at the time was a very angsty teenager going off the rails, like the sister in the story was, and the other. So yeah, that's what's disturbing most about Daisy Chain is it's in my family. So I put my family through that. I don't think any of them have ever heard it. Yeah.
Coming soon from Big Finish.
Sapphire and Steel have been assigned. Daisy Chain.
This is the place?
This is the place.
Looks just like all the others.
I knew you wouldn't like it.
It's not a question of like or dislike, but it does all seem rather mundane.
Steel, it knows we're coming.
It's coming for us. Stand back. Get away from me.
No! She tried to kill me.
What? Don't be ridiculous. We're here to help you.
Who's there? Please. Why don't you show yourself?
Do as I tell you.
Please!
I loved you. So why did you kill me? Look at me.
I did not kill you. You are not dead. Sapphire, can you hear me?
Steel.
Where are you?
I don't know. It's dark.
Sapphire?
You were actually in Daisy Chain.
Yes, I was in Daisy Chain because, again, I sort of instantly got on with Nigel, and I used to act a lot when I was a kid. I was in a lot of drama groups and things. That's what I wanted to do before I became a writer. And yeah, so I needed the problem with anything like any audio thing is you've got a limited cast, which when it's something like Sapphire and Steel or Doctor Who, you often need people to die because that tends to be what the adventure is. And it becomes quite hard to sort of go, well, obviously they're not going to pay an actor to come in and do a day's work and so on. So I sort of cheekily, I think I suggested it to Nigel Woods. I said, look, I'm not the world's greatest actor, but to have this external character, this pizza boy, could be killed off. I'm quite happy to give it a go. And yeah, it was bizarre because I did background voices for the Rapture and so on. So, but I'd never played anyone. And yeah, I just remember standing at this microphone next to Susanna Harker, trying to, this person who wasn't acted in years, and when he did act was in local drama groups, is standing next to one of the finest British actresses we have, trying to act alongside her. And yeah, I played that poor pizza boy who, got electrocuted by a doorbell and then turned up in someone's head. I think I had lines in someone's head, don't I? I come back as a sort of ghostly spirit. But again, Daisy Chain was slightly me doing, maybe coming from a slightly different background, which I think actually the variety of it works, was had I seen maybe a bit of Sapphire and Steel when I was younger? Someone had a video or something. I'd seen a bit of Sapphire and Steel, I think, when I was younger. Someone had a video or something, and I got the maybe DVDs at that point, DVDs of the TV series. Watched them all. Absolutely fell in love with the show. I mean, it's just one of the most glorious. Pretty much every year, I find a new person who hasn't seen it. I'm like, right, you're coming round to mine every night for a week, and we're going through Sapphire and Steel. But again, if you look at the Sapphire and Steel range, Steve Lyons, who is slightly older than me, God, when I first met him, I was such a fanboy because he wrote some of my favourite new adventures, Head Games and things like that. So I was such a fanboy when I met him. But like The Passenger, the first Sapphire and Steel, is very, very traditional Sapphire and Steel, which is brilliant because it's kind of what the range does. It's a nice thing to do, is to go, you remember the TV series? I know the different actors, but this is pure Sapphire and Steel. And mine is very much a modern day version of Sapphire and Steel. So instead of nursery rhymes, it's TV adverts and things like that. I say modern day, 20 years ago, whenever it was. So that was great fun to do. And I'm very sort of proud of the Daisy Chain script. Although, again, it is very dark. The ending is bleak. The ending is horrible for that.
Yes, as I said, I was left feeling quite disturbed after that.
Yeah, and I think that was what I wanted to do, was because actually I've got a bit of a phobia about how the character dies at the end. How Sapphire encourages that character to kill themselves. I have a bit of phobia about that, and actually what I wanted to do was do something that would terrify me. What would actually freak me out listening to it on audio. And yeah, I don't think I've listened to it since it came out because I was like, nope, too dark, too horrible.
Well, anyone who hasn't heard it can still get it on eBay for about £500.
God, yeah, because you can't get it, can you?
That's right.
Oh, I'm very grateful I've got my copy. So
yeah.
when I run out of rent money, I can I've got it saved to my iTunes. When I run out of my rent money, I'll be selling that.
You also did the Mystery of the Missing Hour, didn't you?
Yes.
And that was the episode where Sapphire and Steel kind of bled into the reality of the Big Finish Studios itself. Is that right?
Yeah. That, actually, for everything I've said about not being a technical writer, that was the most technical thing I've ever done. I'm a huge fan of Agatha Christie, and I'm very proud of the Mystery of the Missing Hour, just because it's a proper murder mystery. There are clues all the way through. It was proper. It wasn't me going, as with a lot of what I write, is what emotional journey am I taking this character on? The Mystery of the Missing Hour is very much a technically plotted out murder mystery where all the clues are there. And that came about actually because at the recording of Daisy Chain, we went to the pub afterwards, And it was the first time I'd met Nigel Fairs, who was the producer and had gone to be a really good mate of mine. And I said to someone, it was one of the actors, I was chatting away, and we were talking about French and Saunders. Presumably, do you know who French and Saunders are over there in Australia? Yeah. You are Australia, aren't you? Yes.
Yes.
You're not New Zealand, because I know that would be the wrong thing to say if you're New Zealand. But French and
I'm
Saunders,
actually in Tasmania. Do you know where Tasmania is?
Vaguely.
It's a little island just south of Melbourne. So
lovely. So
yeah,
they're
not
neighbours.
part of the mainland.
Melbourne, neighbours. Sydney, home and away. That's how I tell them apart. French and Saunders did this sketch where, when I was growing up, they did a sketch based on an old TV series called The House of Elliot. And they did one called The House of Idiot. But it is one of the finest comedy sketches, spoofs of anything that has ever existed. It is just brilliantly, hysterically ridiculous, but also a very, very clever spoof of tiny things that happened in the TV series. It's just beautiful, and it's got a great line in the House of Idiot sketch of something like "Don't be silly, we're between the wars," which is a brilliant line because obviously House of Elliot was a very period in between World War I, World War II TV series. But obviously no one can ever say we're between the wars because nobody knows World War II is coming. And so I'd always thought that was just such a clever line because it doesn't feel silly. If somebody says, well, no, we can't do that because we're between the wars. Doesn't intrinsically feel like a silly thing to say unless you actually go, well, no, because they don't know World War II is coming. So how ridiculous is that? And Nigel overheard me saying that to someone, whichever actor I was talking to about this sketch, he overheard me saying it, and he screamed with laughter because it turned out it was one of his favourite things as well, and that was just us best friends forever. And so then he was going to commission me, I think, again anyway, but he said, "Would you do that?" So the whole thing of Mystery Missing Hour comes from that line of "We're between the wars." I think a character actually says it or says something similar to it. And yeah, it was very hard to write because it is very technical and because, like you say, it spoofs Big Finish, or it breaks the fourth wall, literally comes through the fourth wall and becomes a recording of a play. But that great thing was doing lots of clues to that. So doing that slightly, characters were describing what they could see, and things like that, and spoofing the sort of murder mystery where somebody went, I think Sarah Douglas goes to her bedroom and says, "But goodness, what time is it?" And people very clearly spell out the time because that's a clue to the murder. That will be then a clue to the murder. So it was great fun to do. And yeah, I remember being very proud of Mystery the Missing Hour, actually, just from a point of view of this isn't just a character going on an emotional journey, which I don't want to dismiss everything else I've done, but most things I do tend to be a character goes on an emotional journey, fit a story around it. Mystery the Missing Hour very much is not that. It comes from very much a different mindset of how can I tell A, this sort of spoof of murder mysteries, B, this sort of, like you say, breaking the fourth wall, so you end up with the actors in the recording studio. C, still make it scary. Hopefully it's still scary because it is Sapphire and Steel and it should be scary. But D, how do I make it? It can't just be a sort of murder mystery that then just breaks the fourth wall. The clues for the murder mystery have to be the clues. So if you're listening to it, I hope people have gone back and listened to it a second time and have gone, oh, that's a clue because that's not actually... That's Sarah Douglas. Sarah Douglas, the actress, forgets a line about peas. I remember she says, these are great garden peas. And somebody, which obviously wouldn't happen on audio anyway, but it should be a clue that if you're listening to it, you should go, oh, that's the actress forgetting her line and one of the actors telling her what her line is. I get that now. That's a clue to the fact that this is a radio play rather than a real life event. So yeah, it was great fun. I wish Sapphire still had carried on because we had so many bonkers plans for it. Nigel's very much the same sort of mindset as me of let's just have fun, let's explore characters, let's do angst, let's do drama, but let's actually have really good fun doing it because that's where you get the best, I think, the most rewarding play, the most rewarding piece of fiction for a listener as well, is when you go, oh, these people have enjoyed themselves. These people are really going for it. It's not just, oh, here's the next story.
But your stories tend to deal a lot with more, there's kind of less science fiction and more relationship. So if you're going to explore something in a deep way, a meaningful way, on a relationship level, you go to a Joe Lidster story. That's what you get. You get the Master. You've got the relationship between the Doctor and the Master between the guys that he sets up camp with in that little area. And Terra Firma, you've got Davros and his mental state. And the mental states of all the other people around are the focus of that story more than the story itself. And I think it was a similar feeling that I got from The Reaping. It was less of a Cyberman story and more of an exploration of Perry's story.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not the world's biggest science fiction fan. I love Doctor Who, but I think Doctor Who is an adventure series. I think it's escapist adventure. Kids and adults, I still imagine the police box just arriving and going, yes, take me away from my life. We imagine that, and I think Doctor Who's possibly at its worst when it goes too sci-fi, or certainly it's not to my tastes when it goes too sci-fi. It's why Rose is such a brilliant story, because it's not in-your-face sci-fi. I remember at the time when Rose came out, people didn't like anti-plastic, and it's like, no, this is for a general audience. They need a simple thing to get them into Doctor Who, and then the following week it's all full on aliens and stuff. But again, it's still very relatable. And yeah, I'm not. I'm the absolute opposite of Christopher Bidmead. I have no interest in any of that kind of stuff. People have to explain how eclipses work to me. I don't understand any sciencey stuff, and I've got no real interest in science fiction. I like Star Trek, and I'm enjoying the new Star Treks, and there is sci-fi I do like, but yeah, that sort of technical sci-fi stuff is just not for me. And yeah, I don't think I've ever done it. Pretty much all of my stories are, there's an off switch. That's how you end it. Because I don't know, I don't find that stuff particularly interesting. I'm interested in I'm interested in character. I've always been interested in character, and certainly that's what got me my job at Big Finish. Gary liked the original pitch because it focused on character, and Jason Hay-Gallery, who's the big boss at Big Finish, was the one, luckily, before the Rapture came out and was despised, Jason messaged the producers at Big Finish and said, because he directed the Rapture, he said, I love the character work that this guy's done. It's very different to what we do. Please try and employ him. And that got me the job on Sapphire and Steel, because actually the Sapphire and Steel job, I think, took ages, but I did get the job quite early on Sapphire and Steel. Even though other stuff came before it. And that's, again, so Sapphire and Steel got me a lot of work because Nigel Fairs, who produced that, me and him instantly clicked, and he really likes character stuff. So he instantly was employing me on The Tomorrow People and on Sapphire and Steel again. So yeah, it's The Reaping came about because I'd always been slightly interested in the fact that Perry never went home. And Perry's kind of, I think, possibly with the Fifth Doctor companions, but certainly when he gets into Perry, that's when you start to get a little bit more, I don't want to say new series, but because of the way TV changed and so on. By the time you get to Perry, you start to have a little bit more family around them. Obviously Tegan had it, but Tegan kind of would meet the occasional relative, and occasionally they'd die and she wouldn't be bothered. Nissa's whole family got wiped out. She got over it very quickly. Adric died. She got over it. Perry's the first one you get a slightly more, in Planet of Fire, you get just a slightly more interesting family setup that isn't then wiped out. So we know Howard is there. We know her mum is on the island and Mrs. Van Geysingham somewhere. But the fact she never goes home always slightly bothered me, because it was like, well, Are they still on Lanzarote? Do they wonder where their daughter is? Has the Doctor gone back and said where she is? And so I'd always had this slightly nerdy thing of it would be interesting to take Perry back home, because that's what the new series would do. Certainly. Or did I start the Reaping before the new series came out? It was certainly that kind of mindset. If I don't think it was necessarily influenced by the new series, but I certainly had that sort of mindset of it'd be interesting to take Perry home. And I've always liked Perry. I think, again, she's possibly the first one I sort of really do kind of slightly remember. And I'm mates with Nicola now, so that's bizarre. But it's such a weird world. Sometimes when you look back and you go, I went to New Year's Eve at Nicola Bryant's. That's Perry, who I remember when I was a kid. She is a great actress, Nicola is. She was undersold by the TV series, I think, in the way that most people were in Doctor Who, because it was Rubber Monster. But she is a fantastic actress, and I just thought it'd be interesting. So when Gary said, "I'd like a sixth," I think Gary said, "I'd like a sixth Doctor Cyberman story." I said, "Well, I've always wanted to take Perry home, possibly kill off the mum, to explain why Perry never goes back home." And so it came from that sort of viewpoint of I'd like to take Perry home and explore who Perry is in a relationship with her mother. And then I gave her a best friend from school and so on. And it was, so it came from that. The sci-fi, I mean, it's not sci-fi, it's a horror movie. It's a pure 80s American horror movie. But once I like to get a sort of idea of what it is. And so I very much wanted it to feel like it came out in the 80s, but with a sort of more 2000s sensibility about the emotions. But I realise it's very much an 80s horror movie. It's graveyard, it's zombies. The Cybermen are effectively zombies. It's possession, body horror. And so it came from that. So, I mean, I couldn't even tell you what the sci-fi stuff in it is. Oh, there's a Cyberman from the future, isn't there?
That's right.
Yeah, there's a Cyberman from the future, from the Time War, isn't it? Did I sneakily do a sort of slightly, we've escaped a big war in the future?
Something like that. But you're right. It's not what I paid attention to.
No, so I just, so I think he's in an egg, and then it blows up or something. Doctor overloads it with emotions, and it blows up. But which there will be a lot of people out there who would go, well, that's rubbish. You shouldn't just do that. But that's, like you say, I suppose that's a Joseph Lidster script. Joseph Lidster script isn't going to have a super technical, clever ending. It's going to have, hopefully, an emotionally resonant ending or thematic ending. It's going to have, the story will be stopped by what the characters want and what they need and so on. I think, again, just coming from maybe a slightly younger generation to a lot of the other writers, I've come from a slightly younger generation of television and learning of scripts and so on. And like you say, everybody has their own styles.
The one thing I did want to point out, you're talking about character, is Nicola Bryant's performance right at the end when her mother does die. I was listening to that just the other day for this podcast episode, and her performance actually gave me chills.
Yeah.
It was that good.
She's so good.
So if anyone wants a brilliant performance, they've got to listen to The Reaping. I think it's Nicola Bryant at her very best.
Oh, absolutely. But I think they all are. I think I've been very lucky with my cast at Big Finish, but The Reaping, certainly, I remember, I haven't heard it in a few years. Sorry, I was going to try and re-listen to it before this, but it's been quite the week. But I remember with The Reaping, it was one of those where I was very lucky on every level. It's a gorgeous cover. David Darlington's music is beautiful. It's possibly my favourite soundtrack. And every member of the cast is fantastic. And I was so lucky. Well, not lucky. Yeah, lucky that, Gary Russell did that for me. I mean, that's always my thing, is I'm very grateful that other people would take part and do it. But yeah, I was, again, very lucky with such a great cast. But Nicola is... I knew Nicola was brilliant. This is one of those things where I should check the timeline. We used Nicola in a Dark Shadows audio, and I can't remember if that came before or afterwards, but I knew when I took over the Dark Shadows range for Big Finish that I wanted to use Nicola because she's just fantastic. She is such an underrated actress, and a lovely person. She's a gorgeous person to be around, and so I knew she'd be able to do the Reaping. You know, I knew she'd be able to do grieving justice. And again, with Doctor Who, you can't have too much grief. You can't spend hours exploring what grief is. You've got to move on to the next adventure. So I think my idea behind it was, oh, that was the other nerdy thing. I wanted to slightly explore why the relationship between the Doctor and Peri changed before Trial of a Time Lord. So my idea behind it is that at the beginning of the Reaping, they're brilliant bullshit cells where, you know, there's a lot of love there. To be fair, the Doctor and Peri is like my relationship with most of my friends. We just take the mick out of each other all the time, and we're very snappy. But at the end, it's a much gentler thing because obviously she's gone through this awful, traumatic experience that explains why she never goes back home. I mean, obviously because she died, but it explains why she never needs to go back home, and also why they have a slightly more gentle relationship.
Tell me about the 8687. Where did that come from?
So, at the time, I was working on the Reaping, and I don't think I'd done that much on it. And Gary Russell came to me and said, "Oh my God, Janet Fielding's agreed to do an audio. Will you write? Put the Reaping to one side. Forget about Colin and Nicola. I want you to do this Peter Davison, Janet Fielding audio." And I went, "I really want to do the Colin and Nicola one as well." And he said, okay. And I said, so presumably the Janet one could come out a year later. And he went, no, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the Colin and Nicola one that you're doing now. That's going to come out 1 month. And then the Janet and Peter one will come out the next month. And I just went, that's going to seem very odd. Me writing 2 consecutive audios is going to seem bizarre. Because, again, it was a slightly different time at Big Finish. I mean, now you say, you know, Matt Fitton might have 2 audios a month. And then John Dorney might have 2, you know, one come out because there's different ranges and so on. At that point, there were much fewer ranges. So it was just unheard of that you'd have a right to bring out 1 in June, 1 in July or whatever. So I said, well, what if the Peter and Janet one was cyber related and sort of a sequel or a prequel? And then I worked out this thing of I could tie it into The Harvest, which had come out long before. And so 86 and 87 were I said, because that way it won't feel weird. It'll be, oh, Joseph Lidster has written this month and next month because they're connected. It'll feel epic and weird and brilliant. And then it all got forgotten. But 86, 87 were the numbers of the releases. So The Reaping was 86, The Gathering was 87. And the idea behind it was, there was some talk of Peter Davison's Doctor. The 5th Doctor was going to have a memory loss, memory wipe. I think it was something. So it must have been a behind-the-scenes thing that Gary Russell was planning. I think it was to do with RMM, and I think the 5th Doctor was going to lose memory of his adventures with Peri and RMM. I cannot for the life of me remember why. And so it was part of the leading up to that. So the idea was 8687 was a bit sort of bad wolfy. It was a meme that the Doctor had. Oh, I should have rehearsed. The Doctor, I think, had set it up so that it would repeat, and it would try and remind him. It would try and remind the Doctor in the Reaping that the adventure, The Gathering, which obviously came out the next month, had happened in his past. Oh, it's very timey-wimey. And obviously it did. So he says in the Reaping, I keep hearing those numbers. So also it was a bit of fun once I realised I could do it. It was like, great, where can I mention 8687? And so it's in it a lot. And then the idea would be that a later audio would have revealed that the 5th Doctor had lost it, and the Gathering is set during his travels with Peri and RMM. So a later audio would have explained why he lost his memory of all that stuff. When Gary left Big Finish to go and do Torchwood, and Nick took over, I think quite a few plans like that were just ignored, were taken away, which is, you know, exactly what a new producer can and should do. So yeah, it's never been fully explained, but basically, for some yet to be explained reason, the Sixth Doctor can't remember the story, the gathering that's happened in his own past. So he set up an 8687 thing, I think.
Now, that's cool that you mentioned the connection to the Harvest as well, because I was never 100% sure if there was a connection, because I'd never listened to the three in sequence, all three of them. I'd listened to 86 and 87, obviously. But the thing that, for me, that connects all three of those audios is the music. It was David Darlington, you said, was it?
Yeah.
So I checked that today and thought, yeah, he did the music in the Harvest as well. Did the music in the Reaping. There's definitely a connection there.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm good mates with Davey. We work together a lot now on our Dark Shadows range, and we both like a pint, so we get on very well. But I just think is one of the best music guys at Big Finish, and sound design as well, but music, because he very much looks at a story. What Davey doesn't, and we've actually disagreed, because we work on Dark Shadows together. Dark Shadow, he doesn't do what you'd expect with music. So The Reaping is an 80s horror story, and Davey's done this beautiful guitar score. The Harvest is an amazing score, but it's so non-melodic. There's no tune there or anything, because he's doing what he, as a sound designer and music guy, is thinking when he thinks modern day or slightly in the future Cybermen. And that's what I think is brilliant about Davey, is he doesn't do what you'd expect. He doesn't. So in Dark Shadows, I occasionally have to go to him. That's meant to be a beautiful moment. Please, just for once, can we have some violins and sweeping score rather than plop, 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 plonky music? And so, yeah, The Reaping, The Gathering, and The Harvest all have very distinctive scores that aren't necessarily what you'd expect them to be. And it's brilliant because it adds a whole new dimension to it, rather than just being there to emphasize what you as a writer and the actors as actors are doing. It's adding this whole new world to it. I think, like me, he's a big fan of some of the Seventh Doctor TV scores, which again just are their own beautiful thing. So yeah, no, he's great. And but yeah, the connection to The Harvest just came about because I went, it feels odd having two stories connected and then not being part of a trilogy. And then I went, oh, actually, we could connect them to The Harvest that came out before, and it shows it's all obviously Cyberman related. And actually, the good thing about something like that is it gives you extra story elements. So I came up with the character, cannot remember the character's name, but she's in The Gathering. She's the receptionist who's actually brilliant, and she becomes System in The Harvest. And I begged Gary to get the same actress back. I want to say it's called Jane Burke, but I have no idea. No, maybe that's Tegan's mate. But the actress, he got the actress back. So I love all that kind of thing of just going, there's nothing in The Harvest to say that where System has come from, but I love the idea that actually when you listen to The Harvest, if you listen to it now, you go, oh yeah, that System, that woman's voice that's talking all the way through is actually some poor trapped human being who was trapped with cyber technology.
Doctor Who, The Harvest.
Doctor, Executive Security Officer Garnier regarded me strangely, as if he was afraid of me, as if the sight of me horrified him.
Oh, no, not at all. Just healthy respect.
Am I grotesque?
There's a certain degree of tissue swelling and suturing, but that's diminishing daily.
It would be curious if he was afraid of me. That thing that came into this room beside him is far more terrifying.
System recognizes Staff Nurse Schofield. Good morning. It is 08:29 a.m., October 12, 2021. You are logged in to begin morning shift.
Thank you, sis.
Do you know a Dorothy McShane works in human resources?
No.
She seems to have an employment record that doesn't quite check out. And as far as I can tell, she's showing an unhealthy interest in C program.
We're investigating St. Gart's Hospital, Mr. Higgs, your place of employment, because we have reason to believe someone there is conducting potentially dangerous experiments with xenotech, which is technology of non-terrestrial origin.
I have never seen London like this.
Well, it'll become a familiar sight. The Embankment there, Big Ben, and the Museum of Parliament.
You mistake me, Doctor. I mean, I have never seen anything like this. I have never seen in this way before. Shape, color, perspective and dimension, the resolution so bright, unfiltered, unenhanced.
I'm glad you're pleased. Seeing the world through new eyes. You are pleased, aren't you?
Yes, Doctor. I think that is how I feel.
Here's a bit of trivia for you on The Reaping. Did you know, or do you remember, that who played Mrs. Van Geysingham? She was Denise Bryant.
Oh, yes, she was brilliant.
Did you know she? Oh, yeah, she was actually. She was married to Nicholas Parsons.
No way!
Did you know that?
I did not know that. No, I know she's Terrorhawk.
I think they divorced in '89, but I was just looking up some info on her, and yeah, there's a Seventh Doctor connection.
Oh, how brilliant! I know she's
so
in the Jerry Anderson thing. I think she's in Terrorhawks, or no?
Is she?
I think she might be. It's Terrorhawks or something. She's in one of those. So again, that's that bizarre thing. I don't think I knew that at the time, but it's that bizarre thing where I remember Terrorhawks so much as a kid and loving it. Again, slightly younger generation is everybody else will go, oh, Thunderbirds, and I'll be like, I remember that being on BBC Two and repeated, but it was Terrorhawks was our thing, which I adored. And yeah, again, it's just that thing again. The woman who's in Terrorhawks has said my words. How ridiculous is that? But she was brilliant. She was great fun.
Now, the actor who played Anthony Chambers, Stuart Milligan.
Yes.
He went on to play Nixon in series 6.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
The Impossible Astronaut.
Yeah. Yeah. No, because he'd been in. I don't know if he'd done other Big Finish, but I know he is a genuine American actor. So when you're looking for, obviously a lot of people are going to be not genuine American actors when you're recording something over here. But I knew he was a genuine American actor, and he'd been in Jonathan Creek, which excited a few of my friends because they loved Jonathan Creek.
Cool. There's a lot of trivia associated with the actors in The Reaping.
Oh, really?
Well, Claudia Christian from Babylon 5.
Yes, who was actually slightly younger than Nicola. But they are really good mates, or they were really, I presume they're really good mates still. But at the time, they were really good mates, and they actually lived pretty much next door to each other. So they were very excited to be working together. She was great fun. Claudia, I adored.
The guy that played Nate, Jeremy Lindsay Taylor, did you know that he's an Aussie actor? Very famous here in Home and Away.
Oh, I didn't know that. All I remember was he was beautiful. I remember him coming into the studio and me going, well, hello, Aussie hunk.
Actually, he's been in Home and Away since 2016, so many years later after doing The Reaping.
Oh, really? He's in it now? Ah.
I'm not sure if he's in it right now, but he was in it for a long time from 2016.
Ah.
So
he'd
there
been
you go,
in
a bit of trivia there.
I looked him up and I knew he'd been in something prior to The Reaping that I'd heard of, a show I'd heard of. Was it Blue Healers or one of those kind of shows that I've never seen but I've heard of?
John Schwab. Drink the coffee. Drink the coffee.
Yes.
I think he was he was the actor in Dalek who got his face suckered off.
He was, yeah, because I remember there was this period of time where it was when Nick took over. I think because Nick had the connection because he was playing the Daleks in the TV series, and I think John Schwab, and then he got I can't remember her name, the woman who was the Dalek Control, brilliant actress. She ended up doing a few. But John, I think Nick must have got on with John. And I think John was pretty much the first new series guest star that started to do Big Finish. So I think he'd done a couple, or at least one before mine. But that period of time was actually very exciting. If you got someone who'd been in the new series, it was really like, oh, this is, I saw you on TV like a year ago in Dalek. He was great fun, yeah. And that policeman, I do think he's very good at the policeman.
Very good. So, I think that's all the trivia I wanted to share with you on
thank you very much. I did not know that about Mrs. Van Geysingham being married to Nicholas Parsons. That's great fun.
Yeah. They're divorced a long time though, 1989. So you think you're old with The Reaping coming out 20 years ago? 1989 was a lot longer ago. Now you're talking about crossing over to TV. One of my questions is, because I believe, that's my personal belief and opinion, that Big Finish stories have a lot more meat to them than a lot of the TV episodes, and I question why Big Finish authors don't write more for the TV series. However, you yourself did transition to the Doctor Who universe on TV. You haven't written a Doctor Who episode, but you've written for Sarah Jane, you've written for Torchwood. What's that transition like, going from audio, where you started, to TV?
I mean, it's a whole new world. It's the bizarrest thing. So Gary Russell, when he left Big Finish, went to, I think he did another job first. I think it was to do with, what do you call it? The sort of expanded world of the TV series. So it was to do with checking books were okay and things like that. But then he ended up becoming the script. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he just went to be the script editor on Torchwood. But after series 1 of Torchwood, so he got me the job on series 1 of Torchwood of doing a bridging for audio, for the audiobooks, the 3 novels that came out first with Torchwood. And he was very good, because what he did was he got us to go and visit the set. So he took me and the 3 writers, because obviously Torchwood hadn't come out, so people didn't know what it was going to be. So he took me and the 3 writers to the set. And it was very nice, because there was literally no reason for me to go there at all. But he was, it would be helpful if the guy cutting these novels down, ripping these novels to shreds so they could fit onto an audio, so they could fit onto CDs, it would be helpful if he went onto set. And around the same time, James Goss had employed me to write the spin-off websites for Doctor Who from the Christmas Invasion, so the first Christmas story. And that meant I was going to Cardiff a lot and being seen there a lot. Not being seen. I became sort of slightly part of the huge Doctor Who family that was based in Cardiff at that time. And then series 1 of Torchwood came out, and Russell T Davies said to Gary, is there any writer, if you could pick one writer at Big Finish who you think, who has no TV experience, but you think would be someone who could possibly write for Torchwood, he wanted to sort of give new writers a chance, and Gary very kindly suggested me. Again, I think maybe because I'd done my audios from a slightly different point of view. I'd done them more from the character-based stuff, although I did have my nerdy Doctor Who elements, they were kind of then put into, the stories didn't feel like they were just done to explore why did Perry never go home. I imagine most people listening to The Reaping have never made that connection that, there's a reason why Perry's death won't affect anyone on Earth. The Doctor doesn't have to go back to Earth. So coming at it from this slightly different point of view, I'd trained, by doing a media degree, I'd done a lot of script writing training. So again, I was sort of, one thing I never do in my Doctor Who stories is there's never a TARDIS scene, because I think on audio, what's the point? Get on with the story. So I think just a lot of things made Gary go, oh, well, maybe Joe would be worth suggesting. So I went and met Russell and Julie. And what was great was I'd been a huge fan of Series 1 of Torchwood, but they'd said to me, I'm sort of convinced that what got me the chance to write for it was they said, oh, what are your honest opinions of Series 1 of Torchwood, including, was there anything you didn't like? And that's always a slightly poisoned chalice, because you sit there and go, well, I'm just going to tell you I love everything, but I didn't. As you've probably experienced here, I babble a lot. And I babbled, and I said, I really love Torchwood, but there'd been one episode I hadn't liked, and that was, I'm going to say it because there's nothing against the writer, because it was PJ Hammond's one, the Fairies one. Now, PJ Hammond is a god, and Sapphire and Steel is one of the greatest TV shows ever made. I didn't enjoy that Fairies episode. I felt it didn't fit in with the vibe of Series 1 of Torchwood. It's not a bad episode of television. It just, for me, didn't work as part of Torchwood. And I think that got me the job because I was so passionate about Torchwood to the point that I was able to say, actually, I didn't like this one episode. I think they went, oh, no, this guy really does get Torchwood or gets a version of has his own opinions about it. And yeah, so I got commissioned to write a thing called a Nova Commission. So they'd commission 15 scripts for the 13 script series. And if a script, so they'd have 2 spares if a script fell through for some reason. And I discovered, and I remember the day I discovered it was Gary Russell was having a flat warming or something. And it was the night 42 went out. And I was there. And I think it was Gillen Seaborn, who was the producer of Doctor Who Confidential, who by that point I was good mates with, because again, it was all one big family. And Gillen made some comment to me about how my episode of Torchwood was being made. Or so she implied it in some conversation. And then somebody else said something. And I just started to get this impression, is my episode being... People know more about my episode than they should do, because it's just an overcommission. And so I went to Gary, and I went up to him, and I had a couple of drinks, and I just went up to him and said, Gary, Gillen's just said this, and that person's just said this. And he went, all right, yeah, I didn't want to freak you out, but yeah, your episode is not an overcommission anymore. It's actually episode, whatever it was, 7 or 8 or something. It's actually being made, at which point I did freak out and had to be taken out of the party, sat on these steps. I remember just Gary sitting me down on these steps outside of his flat and just saying, okay, breathe deeply. Okay, you're doing fine. It's nothing to panic about. And yeah, it's just, I mean, it is such a different ballgame. You do an audio, you've usually got maybe one script editor who will also be the producer, who might also direct it. You know, it's usually recorded in a day, or if it's a longer audio, it's recorded in 2 days. It's a quick process. You then hear it when it comes out. With TV, it's a much bigger process, and the most terrifying thing. I mean, I've done quite a lot of kids' TV now, so I'm sort of slightly more used to it. But the most terrifying thing, I think, I don't remember the Tortured one so much. I remember the Tortured read-through. And I just freaked out and ran out as soon as it had finished. And Bern Gorman chased me down the corridor to thank me for the script, because obviously it was a very Owen-heavy episode. And I just was like, oh, yeah, thank you. And then I went outside and was chain smoking outside, just being like, this is just crazy. Why am I, I should not be in this room. This should not be happening. And Eve Miles came out. And again, because I was just so, I'm a boy from Yorkshire. She went to air kiss me, and I moved my head the wrong way and nearly headbutted her, and she screamed out in that Welsh voice, she went, he's just trying to headbutt me! Obviously joking, but I was just like, oh my God, I've just nearly killed Gwen Cooper. But I remember, like, my first Sarah Jane, it's not the read-through, what do they call it? The room, the meeting where they get all the technical people in, and I remember that one clearly, because I remember I was just terrified, because it's bizarre, because you suddenly have these people you don't know. This woman is standing up going, right, well, what I've decided is, for Clyde's dad, I'm thinking this kind of costume. And you're like, who are you? Where is this? How are all these people working on this thing I'm writing? This is just bizarre. They're all these amazing, brilliant, talented professional people who don't even all work in the same room. So they don't all know each other. But they're all standing up and going, right, I found this location. And you're like, how long have they had the script? Who's doing all this work for something that I've written? So it's genuinely bizarre from that point of view. From a writing point of view, and it still continues to this day for TV. For audio, you tend to be dealing with one person. So you have your script editor, who's probably your producer as well, and they will give you the notes, and it's usually do the notes. With TV, you are getting notes from a script editor, a producer, an executive producer, maybe from the channel itself, from the TV channel itself. So you're getting all these different notes that hopefully, if you've got a good script editor, your script editor is putting them all into one document and pointing out that there might be bits where the executive producer disagrees with the producer. But again, Russell gave me some great advice there and said, if you get conflicting notes, it's because your script isn't working. And I've always taken that on board, that if one person says that scene is too funny, or if one person says that scene isn't scary enough and one person says that scene is too scary, then you have to look at it and go, okay, so what's wrong with the scene? Because two people are taking two different... It's hard when you get those conflicting notes, but you have to look at it, and if you've got a good script editor, you can say to the script editor, okay, I think what they're not getting is that I was aiming for this, which means that what I'm aiming for isn't working. It's on me as the writer to change. But yeah, so it's a longer process. There's a lot more boring, not boring, but a lot more technical challenges. One of my Sarah Jane adventures, the actor playing Luke could only go on location for a day. So that was the Mad Woman in the Attic. He could only go on location for a day, so I had to bump him into a children's home, and he could never go and do any of the beach stuff because he was doing his exams at the time. Once you actually get into that mind, it's great watching TV where you suddenly go... There was an episode of Doctor Who this year where... Ruth, fugitive of the Jadoon, Bradley Walsh, when the Doctor lands back on Earth, she meets Yaz and Ryan by a river, and they go back to the TARDIS, and Graham's in the TARDIS, and I'm watching that going, yeah, Bradley Walsh had limited location filming days, so they couldn't do that scene by the river. And of course, a normal person watching it would be, well, it only took 2 minutes to, but again, with the TV thing, you realise just how much work goes into it and how long it takes to actually film something. And so literally, there will be actors you can't use in certain locations. I had it with Tosh in Torchwood. I think Tosh couldn't go on location because of the actor availability. So I think a bunch of us got told we had to make sure Tosh was only, or had very limited location filming. So she couldn't go off and go to Richard Bryce's house, or go outside and look for Richard Bryce, which is good because also on Torture Dread, the problem was there were too many people, they wouldn't all fit in the SUV. So you always had to make the decision of which one gets to stay in the hub this time and just stand there and, which one has to spend an evening filming in a studio, just holding a thing to their ear going, Jack, can you hear me? So that's the difference. There's a lot more technical, logistical, sorry, is the word. There's a lot more logistical things with writing for TV about actor availability, locations, sets, and so on. With audio, you can write what you like from that point of view because obviously it's audio. It's somebody will go into a studio and say your words.
So how do you, Joe Lidster, who's actually working on a show with dark in the title, you write dark stuff. How do you write for, like, you've written a pretty dark episode of Torchwood, then you went to Sarah Jane Adventures. How did you go writing something lighter and more directed at kids?
My first Sarah Jane adventure is a lot darker than my episode of Torchwood. My episode of Torchwood it's got dark themes, obviously. It's got suicide, depression. Certainly that was my attitude with Owen was, again, I'm not going to sit there and explore the technical sci-fi thing of how can someone be the living dead. And I remember people going, he tries to give someone mouth to mouth, or does he? Yeah, he tries to give Richard Bryce mouth to mouth, or something like that. Why is he breathing? Well, obviously he's going to breathe because Bern Gorman's breathing. You can't have him not breathing. And it's sci-fi, and in Torchwood's case, it's often a slightly more mystical fantasy sci-fi. It's got death as a character in it, and so on. But actually, my episode of Torchwood is very much about look at the joy in the world. The whole point of is it called the light? The pulse, the light, the lit up thing, it's about joy. There's always hope. There's always a thing. My first Sarah Jane adventure is about a boy realising his dad's never going to be good enough. It's a much darker story. It just looks lighter because it's sunny. In Sarah Jane Adventures, it's always sunny. So, yeah, I mean, it's actually... We talk about it a lot because I do a lot of kids' TV. Kids' TV is basically what I've been doing since then. I haven't done any adult TV since that episode of Torchwood. We talk about the right kind of fear. So you talk about that. I'm trying to think dread is what we don't like in kids' TV. We don't want dread. We don't want kids absolutely terrified. We want them to be scared, but always know there's going to be a way out. Because you want them to be scared. The Nightmare Mem is apparently very scary was very scary for kids at the time, as adults tell me now, which makes me feel very old. But with the Nightmare Man, there's always a hope. You know that they're going to win. I think with kids' TV, I've just done a series called The Demon Headmaster, which was slightly more. You don't necessarily know they're going to win, but I think at the back of your head, it's a kids' TV series. You know somehow they're going to win. And actually, in The Demon Headmaster, what we always tried to do was at the end of each episode, the kids would have a victory, but the headmaster's always going to win. So you know that if the kids have a victory in every episode, no matter how small it is, no matter what they achieve, there's always a sense of that's going to, at the end, they're going to succeed. With adult TV, with Tortured, I think, there's less of that. And obviously with Tortured, characters died left, right and centre. But I remember on my first Sarah Jane, on the Mark of the Berserker, we got a note from CBBC that, again, really good to what they let us get away with, but he held a pendant thing and this blue vein spread, because I wanted them to be blue, because I said then kids can copy it and draw on their hands and things, because that's what I did at school. And these blue veins, and the eyes would change, and the teeth would change. And CBBC came back and said, happy with all of that, but you can't change the teeth. That's too much body horror for a kids' TV show, because, and again, maybe a bit like I was talking about 4 hours ago when I started answering your questions, was that you reach a stage where you're aware it's not real, but you can still enjoy it. So, although the Vervoids terrified me when I watched it as a kid, especially the bit where one shook your bloke's hand and a spike went into his hand and killed him, and he looks at it and knows he's being poisoned and dies. Now, that terrified me. I wouldn't shake anybody's hand for ages, but there would have been an element of in my head of knowing these are people in silly costumes. Even if I wasn't consciously aware of it, I'd have known that. And I think that's what they did on Sarah Jane. They said, although a kid is going to be watching it going, I know, oh my God, this is terrifying. He's held this pendant and he's becoming this monster. It's all slightly... Somebody can sit there next to them and say, it's just blue face makeup, it's just contact lenses, and it's just an actor screaming into a mirror. It's not real. The moment teeth change, it becomes harder for people to sort of go, oh, wait a minute, no, how have they done that? No, that's terrifying, because that's actual physical body changing stuff. So yeah, it's really interesting. Just knowing, obviously you can't have swearing and things like that, but yeah, just actually, it's always there's always with kids TV, there's always got to be a slight sense of, this is going to work out okay in the end. You can come on this journey. You're going to get a message. You're going to get, Luke should have told people about the Nightmare Man. Although obviously he couldn't, but, that was the whole point of it. If you can tell someone about how you're feeling, then you should. Clyde's going to get, a message of, look, I know you wanted to help your dad, but at the end of the day, you should have told us where you went. And then it would have been over a lot earlier. But you always know with kids TV, you should always know it's not going to be, people aren't going to die at the end of this. There's going to be a way out. There's hope. But then my tortured episode was all about there's hope. So, it tends to be what I do. I get known for doing a lot of dark stuff. Like you said about doing dark stuff, and a lot of my audios are very dark. But actually, a lot of my audios are very hopeful. I've done quite a few short plays over here for sort of fringe theatre. And a lot of my plays tend to be, and I think my writing tends to be generally, hopefully you will fall in love with the characters. Hopefully I will make you laugh a lot. And then, darkness. And some of them are darkness, end. And half of them are darkness, but there's hope. There's a way out. And actually, bittersweet often is what I tend to do. Because I kind of think that's what life is, so...
I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us, and I'm grateful that Big Finish took you on, let alone imagining how grateful you are that Big Finish took you on.
If they weren't, I'd be working in car finance, because that's what I was doing when Big Finish employed me, and I was actually starting to do very well at car finance, bizarrely, because I can't do maths. So I might have caused the credit crunch. But yes, I'm very grateful, because otherwise I'd be working, although I would probably have a nicer flat. I'd probably be paid a lot more, so I'd probably have quite a nice flat now. But yeah, I'm very grateful.
There's another Joe Lidster story in there about a guy working in car finance. I know it.
Oh, I think I did. My first short story for Zodiac, Short Trip Zodiac, is effectively me being turned into a vampire. That was very much my lifestyle at the time of, we're out again, because we would go out every night. So yeah, no, there is. I don't think I said he worked in car finance, but actually quite a few of my short stories around that time had what it's again. Actually, one thing I would say about my writing is that it comes from a point of view of, I remember when I was at university, we went back after second year. No, we went back for second year, and somebody went round our group and said, what did you do during the summer? And quite a few of them, well, I made a short film. Oh, well, I did this, so I did that. And I went, well, I worked in a restaurant, so I could afford to come back for second year. So actually, coming from a more, not working class, but working to middle class family, where I constantly worked, and from doing jobs like office work, I always say my one piece of writing advice to anybody is go to anything you can, but also work in any job you can, because you meet people and you learn what makes people tick. If you are just doing short films or, just watching Doctor Who, Doctor Who wasn't my favourite programme growing up. Things like Cracker were. And I think that's heavily probably influenced my writing more than Doctor Who, which is, it's not everybody's cup of tea, but the fact I was slightly, like you said at the beginning, the fact that I was slightly different to other writers at the time is what helped me, touch wood, still vaguely making a career out of it.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank
you. Very much appreciate hearing your insights, and it's fascinating to be able to have a chat with you. Joe Lidster, thank you.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap for this episode of The Sirens of Audio. I'm not going to give you any quick tips now, because we've given you plenty of quick tips throughout the chat that we had with Joe Lidster. And thanks again, Joe, for that. We really appreciate you coming on and chatting with us in great detail about the work you've done, especially with Big Finish. But it's also good to hear and interesting to hear about your TV connections as well. So if you want to contact me for any feedback, you can send an email to sirensofaudio@gmail.com. You can contact me on Twitter @AudioSirens. We've got a website too, sirensofaudio.com. And next week we're going to take a closer look at the Mark Platt story, Eldrad Must Die. There's a bit of a spin on that title for you. So if you haven't heard that one yet, head over to bigfinish.com and grab yourself a copy of Eldrad Must Die and have a listen to that. It's a Peter Davison, Fifth Doctor, and who else is in the cast? It's got Mark Strickson. I think it's got, it's also got Tegan and Nissa. So have a listen to that, and we'll dive a little deeper into that for next episode of the Sirens of Audio. Thanks for joining me, and don't forget to listen to audio drama, because audio drama rocks.
I did it! In the hoop! Swish!